Alright, welcome back to another web development video where I show you how to make modern websites using HTML5, CSS3, and a little bit of JavaScript. In this video, we're going to make this section right here. So this will be like a feature section. It has a center aligned element, and then it has text on the two sides. Probably not going to do the animations for this time. But then it also has a background image with a nice overlay. So we have to think about a few things whenever we do this layout. We are going to use CSS Grid to create this grid structure here, and also to lay out our text here. And we have to think about being responsive. We have to think about what could this look like on a small phone size. I'll show you what these developers have done. So let's look at it on a small phone size. So you can see that they've chosen to simply put the text in order. I'm going to add a degree of difficulty though, so every time we click on one of these headers here, this is going to change to a new image. So like if you're really featuring some of the features of the application or the website on mobile, then you can click it and see a new image of what that might look like in the mobile browser or on a mobile phone. So I have some mock-ups made already. They're sort of generic mock-ups. See if we can get to them. Here we go. So I just made these basic mock-ups. They're just Android phones with wallpapers that I got off online, and so these are PNG images, so they have a transparent background, so it should look something similar to here, and then every time we click on one of these, we're just going to change out those wallpapers just to simulate that there would be a new view here, a new highlight that you would be able to show on the website. So this is pretty popular. It's a little bit sophisticated, so let's just jump into the code and we'll see if we can get this made. Alright, the first thing that we need our section wrapper, and that section wrapper is going to have a background image to it as well. So our section, I'm just going to call it features, and we're going to have a features inner. The reason we need that inner section is so that we can set a maximum width on this. You can see that it doesn't go all the way to the edges necessarily. It stops growing. You can see it's not getting larger anymore. So we want to set a maximum width on that that inner section. We have three main parts of this. We have this feature list one, we have this image of the phone, and then we have sort of a second feature list. So the way that we need to do, we're going to have to separate those things out. So we're actually going to have to create two separate lists, but we can make them look kind of like we want to. So the first thing I want to do is I want to put the image first, and that's because on a mobile phone what I want is the image to be on top, and either this list goes underneath, which when you click it, it scrolls back to the top to show this to you, or we could have a simple select element with all of these things inside of a select list like you would use on a form or something, and then when you click that, it's all in the frame. So you have a little select box here, and then it just sort of stays in the frame. So those are two avenues that we can explore. So let's just let's find excuse me, let's find an image, and it doesn't really matter what the image is. So I like to go back and use the unsplash.com, and it's source.unsplash.com, sort of a low-level API that you can use on any website to just pull in either a random image, or if you know the Unsplash image that you want to use, you can actually use that specific image by putting the image ID right here. You can learn more about it just by going to source.unsplash.com. It's pretty easy to understand. And the what I'm going to do is I'm going to create features image. I'm going to actually make a div here, and then the next one is going to be so we say features. Actually, we don't need that. Let's just do a UL, and this will be our features list, and then we'll have some LIs in here. So I think we have 6 phones, so we'll just do this 3 times. Features, what would it be called? Item, I guess we'll just call it a features item. And just do like that. And then each item is going to have a header, and then it's going to have features item text. So you can see here that each of them has a header, and it has a little bit of explainer text underneath. Let me do the lorem. Yeah, I don't remember how we do the lorem. Lorem 10. Used to be able to do some lorem ipsum text. I don't remember. It does work. I just don't remember necessarily how to do it. So we'll just come. This is a project that I maintain, and it's called Meaningful Ipsum. So you can use it if you want to. These are just famous stories from Western culture, basically. But these are, you know, you've heard of them: Christmas Carol, Pride and Prejudice. So they're just first chapters of famous stories. So you can just literally copy and paste that text to be able to use in any project. What's really cool is, like if you go to Pride and Prejudice, if you need a conversation or you need quotes, you can actually get those from here, which is, you know, it's nice to have some conversational text and not just lorem ipsum. So we have our features list item, so it's feature 1, and then it's going to have our text. Okay, so let's just copy and paste that down. We'll just do that. So there's 1 and 2. So we have 3 on one side. So we're just going to call this also list 1, because we're going to need some sort of tag category type of class here, so that we can specify that list 1 is going to take up this side, and list 2 is going to go all the way across here, and then the image is going to take up whatever is in the middle. So we do need that. We need this to be broken down as 2 different lists. So we're going to copy that list, and we'll just come and paste it down here. And then this will be list 2. Okay. So you can see we have our 2 lists. When they're stacked like this, they don't look different, right? So this is kind of the look that we're going for. But when we put them, we can separate these 2 things out. We can say list 2, we want to move it somewhere. So that's what we're going for, and it's a little bit of a setup that once we get there, you'll understand why I'm doing it. If you haven't worked with CSS Grid or Flexbox, that might be a little bit, it just takes some time to sort of get used to how you need to write your HTML. So if we separate our HTML out, you can see we have our features image, we have 1 features list, and we have a second features list, and that is actually the HTML that we need in order to get started. And the rest of this is all going to be done with CSS, and we might have to work in a little bit of JavaScript, but we'll do that when we need to get to it. So let's First, I want that. I actually need to upload my images, so that was just sort of a placeholder. So let me just upload this first image. And we'll go ahead and do is there a big difference between these? Yeah, there's a pretty big size difference between these, so I just want to see if I can work with the smaller image sizes. I use Adobe XD a lot to do a lot of my prototyping work, so it's just one of those things where it gives you the option to do two sizes in case you need a large size and a small size. So we'll go with that. So you can see here that on this would be like a phone size here, so we're at 400 or so pixels. Then everything is just sort of going to be stacked like this, and that would be the easiest way to go about this. We can make the image width of 100%, and we could see that makes it look bad. If you're going to do that, then you need to use the 2x version of it, because this is way blown out. So I'm not going to do that with this particular one, but what I can do is I can center that image. So if I use my features image class, then I can say text align of center, and then that should center the phone. And we need to do some cleanup work here. I'm going to do the background after I get these things sort of set the way that I want them. And we need to go to our features list, and since both of these are called features list, it should style both of them together. We're going to say list style of none, padding 0, and margin of 0, and that should get us totally reset here so that we can make these whatever we want them to be. The features item header, actually let's go ahead and with Codepen you can add a few fonts in here, so let's just do that. I always use Roboto. Let's use Montserrat. I like that. So we're just going to copy the @import code and put that right into our CSS. Get rid of the semicolon because we're using Sass. I'm using Sass here. And then you can also come down and you can copy the font family, and we'll just make everything. We'll just put that on the body. Again, we have to get rid of that. And now you can see that our fonts have changed a little bit, a little more modern. Our features item header, I want to make sure that that is a bold. And actually, we should probably make that, I mean, it's probably going to realistically be like an H3. This would not be very accessible necessarily at this point because we're only doing one section, but you would sort of follow from whatever you need to do. It would probably be an H3, H4, H5, something like that. So let's just go ahead and change all those. To an H3, and then we'll get that nice bold look with all of them, and we won't have to worry about changing that over here. And that gives us a little bit of styling as well as far as margin, and I'm going to change the margin just a little bit. So we're going to come down and get our class, and let's just make that a margin bottom of 0. And then we need our features item text to be margin top. 0 is going to get us a little bit too close, so we'll say just half a rem, and that should, it helps to group everything together. You see, when you're doing typography, you want all of these things to be sort of grouped together, because whenever you do this, it looks like feature 1, and then this is the next item, and then this is the next item. These don't necessarily look like they belong together in a group. So grouping is sort of one of those design typography ideas, concepts that you need to know. So if this separation is less than this separation, it'll look like these two things are in a group together. Now you could make that even more pronounced by, just doing 0.3. You can see that now when you sort of squint your eye and look at it, they look like this is a group, this is a group, and they're clearly separated from one another. So something to think about when you're doing type and typography. And how you're handling type on the page and in your designs. The fact that the line height on these is not really spaced out also helps to sort of create this as a block of text that goes together. So we have all of our features. I'm not going to do anything else necessarily with these. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my features inner. We're going to need this anyway. And I'm just going to put a little padding on there. And I'm going to say padding of 2 rem. Okay. So that sort of separates things out a little bit. I'm also going to put a little bit of bottom padding on the image, or margin, maybe margin bottom of 2 rem, and sort of move those two things away from each other a little bit. So now we have a couple of things that we can do. We can make it so that when we click on this group here, that it switches this out, or we can make it so that we have a little select button down here. I'm just going to go with the easier thing, which is to just leave this as it is, and then when you click it, maybe we'll scroll back up to this section here. Okay, and alright, that looks good for now, and this is going to hold for a while, so maybe till we get to, let's say, 700 pixels. That's starting to get a little bit wide for my taste, so let's say more like 600 pixels. But that's going to be sort of narrow, so let's say 650. We're just going to have to play with this a little bit to see how it looks. One thing I'm just thinking on the fly, one thing we can do is maybe at 600 pixels, we take this list and we just roll it right down the side here, and we keep our image out to the right. So that's one thing that we can try. And that will be on our features inner. And that's where we're going to call our CSS Grid for the first time. So we say app media, and the minimum width of 600 pixels. We're going to do display grid, and we're going to make it grid template columns 1 FR 2 FR. Let's try that. Okay, and so because our image is first and we have 3 separate elements here, this is going to be a little bit tricky, but not impossible. In fact, what we could do is it's tricky but not impossible. So let's do that. So now we have 3 distinct elements, and so it's saying the first grid section is 1 FR, and then which is 1/3, and then the second section is 2/3. And then because we have 3 sections, it's rolling everything all the way down to the bottom here. Not necessarily what we want, but not bad either. Since everything is left aligned here, we can probably just make this 2 and this 1 and just sort of leave it at that. Or we can just make everything 1. See how that looks. Okay, that's a little bit more of sort of the look that we're looking for. Now we got to take this and we need to put it here as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down and at 600 pixels, this is going to be feature list 2. You can say list 2. We need it to do something specific. So at this width, we need list 2 to be grid column 2. And so now you can see it puts it up here. And we also need it to be grid row 1. Let's see if that gets everything. Okay, so it replaces it. Not what we're looking for. We can just make that here. And let's see, there might be a little bit of spacing. Let's come up and we'll say grid row gap. So this controls any of the row separation in the grid. So this is the column gap and this is the row gap. And we'll just say 0. And I don't think that's going to do anything. I'll show you where the spacing is. The spacing is right here. It's on these two elements. Otherwise they should be right on top of each other. So let's go to our debug mode. And we'll see it more clearly. We go down to a phone. And so here we start to see where our gaps are. And you can see that there's a large gap because of this this phone, and you can see here that our grid structure is showing. So we have 2 columns by 2 rows because this is making up a second row. Now one thing we can do to pull all these things together is we can make the, because this is determining the height of this first or the second column. What we can do is we can use this to stretch across both rows, and then that should effectively bring that one up. I believe that's what's going to happen. So let's just try it out. So this is basically, if you did columns before, this is like column span or row span. You're just spanning one item across multiple columns. So that's going to be our features image. And we're going to come down here, and so at 600 pixels, we are going to say grid row, and we're going to say 1, and just to make it easy, we'll say span all. And we'll see how that goes. And see if that helps us out. There we go. Okay. So not the span all keyword, but span 2. So it's essentially spanning over 2 rows. So before it was just 1 row, and now it's spanning 2 rows. Okay. So you saw our margin at the bottom of the image that we put on it. It was up here, but now you can see that it's clearly crossing over those 2 rows there. Okay. So, which effectively pulls this feature number 4 up. Okay, so now we have essentially what we're looking for. We could get real nitpicky and we could close up this space in between. There's a space on the there's a space right there, you see it at the top. So we could get real nitpicky and we could close up that space. And the way we'd do that with that specific one, we would say list 2 and first, so it would be list 2 features item header and first child, I think we'll get it there, and we'll say margin top of 0. Okay, so you can see that pulled that up, but it only did it for this one. It didn't do it for all of the features item headers. It only did it for the first child. So it did it for the first features item header. So you can do where you're specifically maneuvering or manipulating the different pieces of padding or margin on specific ones. Okay, so this will be essentially what it looks like on a tablet device. And then I think once we get out to, let's say, it looks alright like this, but when we get to 900 pixels, that's when we want to set our 3 across grid. Okay, hopefully that's this is all making sense to you. So we still have list 1, list 2, and we have our image. In our HTML, they're all separated out, right? These are different, clearly very different elements. In fact, we have 2 unordered lists on top of each other, but visually it looks exactly like it should look. But if you came and there was a screen reader, this is what you would get. You would just sort of get it read all the way down the page. But visually we can do quite a few gymnastics with CSS Grid or Flexbox. So here we're starting to get maybe a little bit too much space here, and this is not quite taking up enough space. You could close that up. Let's say at you could get real picky. So at 800 pixels, we don't need this CSS Grid call anymore. We don't really need this row gap call. But what we can do is we can say this one takes up 2/3 of the page, and this one takes up 1/3 of the page once we get to 800 pixels. So that should click right there, you see. So that is sort of how you can bring things together a little bit more inside the section. And then I think once we get to 900 pixels, we should start breaking this up into the 3-column section. So what we're going to do here is we're going to break it up into 3 even sections, and we could do it this way. So you can do it with 3 even sections this way. Once you get to 3 or more, it gets a little bit tedious. So you can use what's called the repeat function. So you tell it how many times to repeat, 3 times, and you tell what is the width of that repeat. It's 1fr. So sort of a shorthand way to write that. You could do the same thing up here or up here. You know, this one you could do, this one you couldn't, because these are 2 different values. So we have our 3-column structure here. You can't really see it because what we've done is we've created this, so we have to sort of undo this and make this normal, I guess. But we're going to change all those things anyway. But as it's normally laid out, because we have 3 different elements, here we have a feature image, we have this list and this list. Because we have 3 elements, it's just taking those 3 elements and laying them out in a grid side by side. So what we need to do, we'll just leave that there. And what we need to do is we need to move this image to the middle section. We need to move this list to the first section, and we need to move this list over to the last section. And we're going to do that at 900. So we'll just copy this media query, and we need to go down here to our image first, and we'll say at 900 pixels we want you to go to grid column 2. Remember we have 3 columns now, right? That's why there's this big space over here. So we need that to go to grid column 2. This is going to slide over to grid column 1 because that's just the way that grid works. It's called the implicit grid, and if you don't explicitly tell something where to go, then it starts over here left to right. But once you tell one item where to go, then it sort of fills in what was before, because it still has to fill in the 3 columns, but it has to fill it in with something. So it goes to the next available element that that's not specifically on the grid, and it puts it into the first. So if I had said grid column 3 for that, then it takes these 2 items which don't have a specific column necessarily. This one does, but it still takes them and lays them out, and then puts this one in the place exactly that you want it to be. So lots of things to sort of understand on the beginning of CSS Grid, but once you get the hang of what's going on and the responsive nature of it, then it actually makes laying things out pretty easy. And so now we have, for list item 2, we have a specific thing that's going on here. So we're going to say at 900 pixels, then we want this to go over to grid column 3. Okay. And we can take this and we can actually make that margin top. Is it initial, inherit? I think it's probably it's not auto, I don't think. So let's just say 1 rem. That might be what it is. Looks like it's about 1 rem. So it sort of just evens everything up, gets rid of that margin that we got rid of. You could also just take and remove the margin altogether, and then you could set a margin in between all of these groups. That's why we group them out like that. So now we have essentially the structure that we want, which is our 3 across grid. Now we want these things, we want this list to be right aligned once we hit this point. So that's going to be list number 1. So let's just come up here and we'll say list 1. That is not spelled right. So list 1 is going to be text aligned to the right. Nope. And so now we get all of our text alignment here, and we have our left aligned text here. And really it's at about, I don't know, it's really at about 900 or 1,000 pixels, maybe 1,000 pixels. We want it to sort of keep this shape right here. So when we want it to keep the shape, we set a maximum width at the place that we want to keep that shape, and then we have to put the margins on either side to auto, and that'll keep it centered in the middle of the section. So we'll come up to our features inner, and at 900 pixels, we're going to set a maximum width 1,000 pixels, and then we'll set the margin to auto. You could also make it 0 in auto, because essentially we're only concerned about the margins on the side. So you can see that it stops growing as you go out. Okay, but it doesn't not shrink when you go to smaller sizes. Okay, so everything is working peachy keen just like we wanted. You can see the responsive nature of it. And now we need to create the background image, and for that I think we will do what's our section called? It's called features. So for that we are going to do the source.unsplash. Just, I don't have an image ready necessarily, and we're just going to do that. So for the features, we're going to say the background is going to be equal to URL, and that URL is going to be the one that we put in before. So it's source.unsplash.com, and then we'll just stick a random image in there. Okay, so now you see that we have our image in the background, but we can't read anything because our image is just not right. And if we look on our if we look on our section here, you can see that there's this nice blue overlay on the section itself, and we can recreate that overlay by going and sort of chaining things onto the background. So whatever comes first is going to be on top. Whatever comes second is going to be a layer underneath that, etc., etc. So I like to use what's called a linear gradient, and this is a relatively new relatively new feature, I think CSS 2 or 3. And what it does is it allows us to put a gradient over the top of an image. And because we're using Sass, we can really easily create transparency with the color. So I'm going to use RGBA, and I'm just going to say blue. And then I give the alpha transparency. So we're going to do that 2 times because the linear gradient takes 2 values. And once we do that, we can see that because these things are the same, you're essentially getting a gradient. So I can show you. You're getting a gradient on top of the image. So this might actually be the sort of look that you're looking for, but the first color is here. You can make that even more dramatic with a 1. Sorry. 1 is completely opaque. So up here it's completely opaque, and then it moves down to this color here, which is the bottom color, which is at 40%. So it's the blue color, but only 40%. So it's you're only getting 40% of the color. So I'm creating a gradient like this, but when you use the value to be the same for each one, you get a solid color, which means that you can have a nice background overlay. Okay. Hopefully that makes some sense to you. And then now we have a little cleanup on our text. We can't see our text very well, so we need to come in and we can go to our features item header, features item text, and we can actually put these things together because they're both going to be white. So we can chain these 2 things together, and we're just going to say color of white, and then that should change both of those. We already have our bold. Let's see, where's our... You can see here that our header is a little bit bigger than our text, which we're sort of getting with the H3, but not really. So we can say font size, I believe it's 1.5 in the browser, so we could say 1.7 rem. Well, maybe it's not. Okay, maybe like that. And then I feel more comfortable with a little bit more space in between these groups. Somewhere we're getting something sort of funky. Is it here? Somewhere we're getting something kind of weird. Okay. So taking it back to its original is really what I want to do. I want to get the original spacing with these items, and I'm not getting them right now. So let's just take a look at that. You can make some design changes in the browser, which is really helpful at times. So here we have our margin top, and instead of 1 rem, we want to do something like features item header. So I'm just trying to look and see if any of these gets moved, which they don't. So maybe we'll just have to sort of split to figure that out by hand. So it's not 1 rem. It is, this should tell us. So it has a margin on the top of 22.4. So that is 22 is like 1.4, maybe 1.4. So that gets us a lot closer. Everything should be lining up because we're using the exact same text, so everything should be pretty close. And even if you stretched it out to like 1.45, that's probably going to get you even closer. It's something like, that's the number. You would just take 16 divided by 22.4 and that would give you the number. So that gets us a lot closer here. And you can see that when we go out, we've set that maximum width, and the photo keeps getting larger, but this all stays the same. And what we see here is we're getting a little bit of, I think the photo is restarting, so it's repeating. So if we come into our background, let's make this so we can see that a little easier. So the background, repeat, we say no, repeat. And then now you can see that there's just nothing over here, it's not repeating. And the background size is going to equal cover. And what that does is it just makes sure that it covers the entire width and height of the background container. And then you can also say, I often like to just say the position is center, and center means center center. So when it stretches and grows, you can see that it grows from the center. It won't grow, you can make it grow from the left side or any sort of value that you want to, so that that part stays in view and the rest of it sort of goes out of the frame. But right now this is really what we're looking for. And then I told you we would do something where when you click these, it would change these images out. So I have a jQuery already attached to this Codepen pen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, when I click on, there's a lot of ways to do this. So when I click on a features item, so when I click on a features item, then I'm going to do something here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get a value from here. It's going to be something that we add here, a data value, and that data value is going to equal, it's going to be equal to this. And so then we're going to go in and we're going to change, actually let's just make it equal to the source, and we'll just change the whole source image. So when I click on this, it's going to find the source image for the first one, and it's going to put that in right here. It's going to just insert it into this image. When I click on feature 2, it's going to be a different image source, and then I'm going to insert that here, and then it should change it on the fly. Okay, so what we need to do is I'm just going to set up a this variable, and so that's going to be equal to this. So it's going to be equal to the feature item that I'm clicking, whichever one. And then I'm going to say image source is equal to this, and I need to put something in here. So I need to say data source is equal to, and we're going to put this because this is our first feature, and that's going to be the one that's showing by default. But we are going to have other features as well, so we need to upload our assets. And I believe I can do this by doing multiple assets. So we already have this one. Let's do this, 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 and this. And we'll just open those up. Okay, so now you can see we have all of our phone assets. So I'm just going to copy the URL. Actually, I need to sort of put this across all of our items. This will make it easier to just insert the new URL. So I'm going to copy the URL for this one. So that's the source where this image is, and I'm going to put it right here. I can also go down and say, you know, phone 3, 4, 5, and 6. Because all things being equal, this is all exactly the same. You can make it so that this is a little bit more where this is the only number really that's the data source. So I'm just sort of taking the quick and dirty way out of it. So we come back down, and when we click on our features item, let's get it back. So we click our features item, it's going to store a variable called image source, and it's going to be at this dot attribute, and that attribute is going to be called data source, data src. I'll show you how this works before I actually get it working. So we'll just say console log image source. So we're just going to log that. Every time we click this, it's going to store this variable, and then we're just going to log it to the console. So we'll save, and we'll refresh here, and we have our console. And then every time that we click one of these, it should show up down here. So our first one gives us the phone 1. Second one is phone 2, phone 3, 4, 5, and 6. And if we click on these, we can see what the image is. You can see that it's a different image for phone 6. So that gets us all set up, and now all we need to do is we need to swap out this, whichever one I click on, we need to put that image source into this image, and it'll swap everything out for us. So we take this, don't need that console log anymore, and we're going to take the image source, and we're going to insert it into the features image. So we say features image img, and so we target that, and we go to the attribute of source. So that's this right here. That's this attribute, and what we're going to put into that attribute is going to be img source. This is our variable that we stored right here. So it should take, when I click on features item 2, it should take this URL, which is stored right here, and it should put it into the source of our image. So this is how it works. We'll save that, and then we'll say down here, and you can see it switches them. Okay, and so you see how that works. And up here, it's a lot easier to see it. When we roll over these things, we can actually make it so that it looks like it should be, like it should be a clickable link. So we say our features item. I don't think we have anything for that yet. So let's go to our features. This looks like a good place. So features item, when we hover over that, let's make the opacity 0.7. Okay, that might be a little drastic. Say 0.8, that's good. And then we're also going to say the cursor should be a pointer, and that gives it the little finger pointer. And then that's a little bit too excuse me, that's a little bit too drastic of a change. So to get a smooth animation on something for a hover effect, you go to the thing that you have the hover pseudo class on. so the main element, and you can use what's called the transition property. And we say transition. What we want to transition is the opacity. I don't believe that the cursor is transitionable. So we transition the opacity, which is this part here. And what you're doing is you're transitioning between what is the default. So the default for this item is 1, and the opacity is 1, so full opacity. And when you hover, it's changing to this. So we want to transition the change from 1 to 0.8. So that's how you have to think about transitions. It's like real low level animation. And then we want it to happen over 200 milliseconds. And then we want to say ease. Ease is a keyword for ease in, ease out. And if you know very much about transitions or animations, you sort of understand that. You could also use the actual ease in, out, which is ease in, ease out. Most of the transitions that I do are ease in and ease out, so I just use, I use ease for that. And then you can see now you get a nice smooth transition, right? And if that's not quite enough for you, you can go back to our original 0.7, and you can really see that now these look like clickable elements, right? Like when I hover over it, I should be able to click on them. And same thing here. It works, you know, all the way down the line. Now, when you're in this mode, it's going to be less important because everyone is going to be on a tablet. So when they click it, it's going to stay like this, but they're not going to be able to see it because on a touch device, you can't see the actual hover taking place. So just to know that. And then on a phone, yeah, the same thing. I was going to make this go all the way back up to the top. I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I have enough, and this is getting long enough that I just want to stop right here. One other thing you could do to sort of set this off from the background is to take your features image and put a slight shadow on it. So we would say not box shadow, but we want to because what happens if you put a box, well, I'll show you. If you put a box shadow, it's going to put it on the actual box itself. So let's say 1 pixel, 1 pixel, 20 pixels, 5 pixels. Okay, so now you see what happens is this is the box for our entire element. That's not what we want to put the box shadow on. That looks bad because we have a PNG image. So all this is, it's unused space, but it's all the space that our element takes up. So because this is the features image div, so our image is only right here, but our div is this big. Okay, and we want to put it on the image. We don't want to put the box shadow on the we don't want to put it on the actual div that holds our image. So we come down and we say our image, and we can try just putting it straight on there like that. You're still getting some weirdness because of the rounded corners, and we'll see if we can fix that. On images, we are able to do filters, and filters are really great. So you can do things like blur, where you blur the image. So they're sort of like filters that you can use in a camera program or some sort of image editing program. So you have different things like blur or contrast, and you can say things like 50%. So it changes the contrast of the image. I don't know that minus 50% does anything, but we have some different filters. I encourage you to look it up at Mozilla Developer Network about CSS filters, because it allows you to do some pretty cool things with images themselves. I'm going to use what's called the drop shadow filter, and it looks like this. Looks sort of like a method or something like that in JavaScript. And so you have the keyword here for the value, and then inside that you have all of your acceptable values. So if we look up if we look up the drop shadow filter, you can see what it does. It applies the drop shadow to an image itself. So you got a few different things here. You have let's see the syntax. So the offset to the X, the offset to the Y, the blur radius, and the spread radius. So it's almost exactly like box shadow. If you're using box shadow, it's almost exactly the same. So we can use those same numbers. Well, let's just say black for now. Am I doing it right? Maybe it only requires no, that's not it. Maybe I have one extra number in here. Okay, there we go. So you can use the keywords here, I'm sure. So we get the same thing. So you can see that it puts the shadow on the image itself, and it eliminates that little corner that's right here because it wasn't putting it on the it's not adding it to the box, it's adding it to the image itself. So it's a little bit different than a box shadow, and it's called drop shadow. It's a filter that you can use in CSS3, and this is a little heavy for me, so I'm just going to say RGBA, and we're just going to do our same black, and we'll say something like 0.2, or you know, until it starts looking like something not too over the top, but you can see that there's a little bit of hovering effect as you see the image, right? You can see that it's hovering just a little bit over that background. And then because it's being added to the image and all we're doing is switching out the image source, we keep that box shadow the whole time. So this is a nice little element that you can use in your website. This is what it would look like full width on a large screen. I would not use a cat in the background. I probably wouldn't use that either, but if you wanted to mess with the padding, or you wanted to make this you wanted to make it take a larger section of the screen, then where you put the background, you would either say padding of 3 rem. That would make everything a little bit farther from the top and the bottom. You can see that it sort of spreads it out a little bit. You could also give this an explicit height of, let's say, 70 viewport height, which would be 70% of the screen. Okay, and then at that point you're going to have to do something to make sure that this is centered, which you can do with CSS Grid, but right now it's not very that wouldn't be something I would do. Although if you use padding, you can see that it allows everything to sort of flow around it, right? So it's a nice sort of thing, and you can play with the padding a little bit on the top and the bottom. I would not do padding on the outsides of it. I would only do it top and bottom. That would leave 0 padding here, and then you're getting 3 rems or 48 pixels of padding here and on top. So that's a nice little section that you can add to any website. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down in the sections below. I'll have the link to this original landing page, and then I'll have the link obviously to the Codepen. And yeah, if you have any questions, like I said, leave them in the comment section. If you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button, and I come up with videos maybe once or twice a week on average. sometimes more, sometimes less, and it's just things that I'm working on. And I've been thinking a lot more lately about building out elements like this, for especially for beginners or people who are new to the industry, so that you can sort of get your you know HTML, you know CSS, maybe you know a little bit of CSS Grid, but you really want to be able to create you need some ideas for creative things, and maybe you see things on the web but you don't know how to make them per se, or you see them. This one is built with Bootstrap, which is fine, but we can build the same things natively using CSS Grid without all the Bootstrap code. And if you want to use Bootstrap, that's fine, but I'm just telling you that there's a lot of things that are possible very easily. You can see that this is not an extensive section of CSS. So, and some of those things, like, some of these things are sort of global, and then we have our breakpoints and things like that. So we're doing something a little more complex, but it's not that difficult to be able to do. And just some super basic JavaScript here, show and hide and take this and insert it here, is real low level JavaScript stuff. But you can create something really nice. You can connect with me on Twitter. My Twitter account is @BrianHafferkamp, Brian with an I. And I'm happy to talk to you there, or if you just want to give a shout out, or you want to share this video, that'd be awesome. If you know some people who could use, they've been looking for something like this. I don't think I have anything else. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.